Hi, my name is Marikka Williams, and I am a GIS professor at Fleming College. And today I will share how I utilize multiple software solutions to map my memories of Peru. I will provide an overview about how I integrate data in various formats to render the multifaceted character of the Peruvian landscape. This is the summary of the topics that I will cover. First, I will introduce the study area, give a little bit of background, and then I will go into a bit more detail about the workflows. I was one of 5 team members who was selected to represent Rotary District 5790 in the 2007 Group Study Exchange with Peru. The Rotary International GSE Program aims to facilitate a cultural exchange, build professional relationships, share success stories, and establish sponsorships to sponsor project initiatives and support underdeveloped communities. The memory map that I created for this presentation provides a small-scale view of the cities and several cultural sites that our team visited during a 6-week visit in May and June of 2007. I refer to these treasured and fondly remembered places as postcard places. The geography of Peru is very diverse, ranging from the Pacific coast in the west to the Andean mountain range in the center and the Amazon River Basin in the east. We primarily visited the highlands and the coastal region in the southern part of Peru. The Andean highlands are beautiful and permeated with various hues of green and complemented by the colorful clothes that the people weave and wear. And the population is composed primarily of indigenous people who cultivate the land and tend to animals. In Cusco, we presented at a Rotary meeting and visited an impressive Rotary project in Urisca, and toured a few churches, visited several ancient Incan ruins as well. We visited this site near Cusco. We also visited these sites, and of course, the famed Machu Picchu. It was truly phenomenal. The architecture was impressive, and it was very interesting to see the symbology that was shared, the mythological meaning that was shared throughout the tours that were given there. And the city is quite vast. Walking through it was like being in a complex maze. This is a Rotary project that we visited in one of the most impoverished parts of Cusco, a village called Urisca. And the project included building a school for children and providing programs for adults on how to maintain balanced nutrition and diversify their diet, and as well as personal hygiene and maintain healthy family relationships. As we traveled from Cusco to Puno, we stopped at this ancient Incan temple. And while we were visiting Peru, we had the opportunity to visit the nearby floating islands of the Uros and the island of Tequila in Lake Titicaca. This is a view from the boat towards Puno. The Uros are self-sufficient and have been living on these floating islands for over 500 years. Their islands, their homes, and their boats are made entirely out of reeds. I was impressed to see that they currently utilize solar cells to generate electricity in their reed huts. And they're also using solar energy on the island of Tequila. The homes are made out of mud bricks with metal roofs, and they grow crops, tend animals, fish, weave, and knit. They also have a school, municipal building, a clothing factory, and a church. After leaving the highlands, we traveled toward the coast into the volcanic and canyon region. And our first stop was Arequipa, where we visited a Catholic university, a convent, monastery, a few churches, a food manufacturing plant, the municipal tourism department. We spoke to high school students in an assembly and presented at a Rotary meeting and visited a Rotary project there as well. After our visit in Arequipa, we traveled to the coastal plains, which are composed of massive sand dunes, productive cropland, and beautiful beaches. And the first town we visited there was Ilo, where we presented at a Rotary meeting and met a bank manager and municipal staff. And this was one of the places where I got to meet with the people that were in charge of mapping and see the technology that they were using and the types of maps that they created. And from Ilo, we traveled to Ica for the district conference, and we presented at Rotary Club meetings there. We visited Rotary Project, a private school, a regional hospital, an urban planning office, an asparagus processing plant, wineries, a chocolate factory, and even toured in a dune buggy in a desert oasis. After the district conference, we took a side trip to Nazca, where we met a few Rotarians and were given a tour of the Nazca lines in a small plane. It's very difficult to see them in photos, especially in a presentation like this, but here's some photos from the town. In Pisco, we toured the Ballestas, the Paracas, Cathedral Rock, a hospital, a police station, a special needs school, and a few Rotary projects. And this is San Clemente Cathedral, which has since been destroyed by an earthquake shortly after we left. After Pisco, we went to Chincha Alta, where we presented at a Rotary Club meeting and visited a few projects, toured a winery, learned how to make Pisco sours, attended a traditional dance lesson, visited the largest chicken farm in Peru, and rode horses at a hacienda. And finally, Lima was our last stop at the largest city and capital of Peru. We stayed in the Miraflores district, the wealthiest and safest area in the city, and toured the city by night, attended a Rotary meeting, visited the National Museum and the Plaza del Armas, where we saw the government palace. So Rotary International has sponsored programs to build friendships, partnerships, and support communities around the world since 1905. They operate on the guiding principles of, is it truth? Is it fair? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And is it beneficial to all concerned? They are inspiring to be around. It's a great community. And Peru is an inspirational place to visit, a home to friendly, humble people who serve as caretakers of a valuable part of the world and who preserve a rich cultural history of early civilization. This map of memories is a tribute to my experience in Peru, to honor the people that I met, the beautiful places that I had the opportunity to visit, and the amazing work that Rotary International does around the world. So the workflow that I use is basically pretty common: acquiring the data, importing it, exploring it, generalizing it, symbolizing it, and integrating the map elements to complete the map. The data that I selected to be included in this map was from USGS, Natural Earth, Esri Living Atlas, OSM, and I geocoded my postcard places on Google My Maps. So this is just a snapshot of the export of the KML file, which I later import into Adobe. From Natural Earth, I downloaded mostly natural-oriented features and the populated places I like because the scale is generalized appropriately for the scale I was working with. And I downloaded land use and water features from the OSM data because it was focused on Peru and had a higher level of detail, and I liked how it integrated into my map composition. I extracted world country boundaries from Esri Living Atlas because I was working first in the ArcGIS Pro environment, where I needed to extract the mosaic of the SRTM data to the Peruvian boundaries. So that was an easy way to import it, project it, and then use it to clip. I downloaded 246 SRTM tiles to cover the extent of Peru and model the elevation. And then I also downloaded Landsat Imagery, 75 files to cover the extent of Peru. My priority was to extract cloud-free imagery in snow-free warmer months. And I utilized false color composite and band 5 imagery simply because of just the immensity of the area, the high resolution, and it made sense with respect to the way that I wanted to render the terrain for my map. So when I'm preparing to create a map, I always remember this quote from Stephen Covey. It helps to think from the end. Where are you trying to get to? What kind of data do you need to support your message? What is it that you're trying to communicate? And to get to know the data, to use filters wisely to improve computer performance, also to select a projection that is not only appropriate to the scale, but that is available in all the software packages that you're utilizing. So I generated the terrain surfaces using ArcGIS Pro in part. I used ArcGIS Pro to mosaic the SRTM data using image analysts and to project it into a common coordinate system, apply bilinear resampling. And I'm just going to zoom through that workflow here. You can see all the tiles here. before they're mosaicked. This is after they're mosaicked. And then I resampled it and projected it. I then extracted it using this mask. And you can see the terrain surface, the elevation model there, which then I generated a hillshade from using the hillshade tool. And then I exported it, making sure to use the Force RGB and use renderer settings. That's a key setting for it to be able to be utilized in Photoshop. So from there, I bring these surfaces into Geographic Imager, but not quite yet. First, I prep the Landsat data. So I start by prepping the false color 753 composite using Geographic Imager to import the data. And then I walk through the workflow here where I first import the data. I have the settings here, you can see. And then you can see they all have black backgrounds, and there is a setting where you could remove them, but I wanted to set a buffer. So I set the buffer and then I just removed them manually and went through that process. Once all of the black backgrounds were removed, then you can see I still needed to do some color balancing. So then I went in and I adjusted the curves to balance it to my eye. And this is the result of that. So then I flattened it and started going through the same workflow with the Landsat 8 band 5 imagery. Same workflow, import, remove the black background manually, and then adjust the curves so it could be utilized as a water mask later on. Both had to be flattened and exported, and then I bring them all back into Geographic Imager. The two surfaces created in ArcGIS Pro along with these two Landsat 8 surfaces. And so I import them all, and then I go through a process of layering them. So I learned the techniques that I use for this from Tom Patterson's shaded relief tutorials, and also from the 4-part Making Beautiful Maps video series created by Adam Wilbert. They're really helpful to me. I didn't follow them exactly, but I utilized the techniques to render the hillshade in the way that I wanted to provide in relation to my palette. So you can see here's that color composite, the hillshade, the digital elevation model, the hillshade, and then I start applying the masks and trying to render shadow and light and build up the landscape with solid color layers and hue saturation adjustment masks, and bring out the Amazon basin area as well as the Andes, and then use the water mask to bring out the water features. And then once this was done, it was rather dark and I really liked it, but it didn't fit into my map composition. And I also struggled with importing it. So I had to break it down into tiles. So this was one of my experiments, but then in relation to my color palette, I decided to lighten it up a bit. So this is the surface that I wound up going with. And these are just some zoom shots of what that looks like up close at 100%. It's quite a large map. It is a large wall map. And this I had to tile down to 4 tiles. And I was able to import those fairly easily. So now I bring it all into Adobe Illustrator using Avenza MAPublisher. And I learned quite a bit along the way. I had lots of crashes, lots of roadblocks, but then I found the best way to do it. And I learned a lot in the process. So importing the data, I use multiple data import each time to set the scale and align the features, and also set up expressions like an SQL expression to extract that Peruvian boundary from the Esri country boundaries upon import in order to set up the 1.25 million, 1 to 2.5 million scale that I utilized in my Australian memory map. So I wanted to retain the same aesthetic and the same scale. So that was the style that I followed. And so I used the attribute filter import, and then I created more contextual data using that filter import to bring in the boundaries of North and South America. And you can barely see it here on the screen, but you can see that at first, basically establishing the study area and the extent that I wanted, and then I cropped all the rest of the data whenever I imported it. So I used a spatial filter to crop using the globe crop, the little globe icon and the crop relationship. So once the data was brought in, you can see all the rest of the vector data is now in. Not the terrain isn't shown here, just the vector data. Then I added the terrain last, and I had to add it in parts. And I made a clipping mask in order to get rid of the surrounds. So you can see the clipping mask there. And this is showing everything together. And actually, this is just the terrain. So starting with simplicity, assessing your features, applying filters upon import improves performance, switching layers off before saving and closing. That was also quite helpful to me because I couldn't, sometimes it wouldn't open because it was too bloated. So then basically I found that if I turned the layers off, saved it, reopened it, it opened fine, and then I could turn the layers on and then work with the design. So finding ways to chunk it down into smaller pieces definitely improves performance. Doing research on palettes, finding the palette that reflects your aesthetic. I had already done this for my Australian memory maps, so it was pretty easy to carry that same palette over. And then basically I just used the style sheet functionality to create some query-driven rules to reduce the number of categories from in this instance, from 7 to 3 to render the water features. And then I also created batch queries to set up definitions and assess the data. And then I grouped it from there and reduced 20 classes to 3, which improves performance and is also easier to read visually. And this is basically what all the terrain and the vector data looks like together. And then I give you a couple zoom in shots here. So basically creating that palette, making it available before you open up the theme sheet, and also deleting all those swatches that you don't need just kind of helps you focus and move faster. And then the labeling tool set, basically researching fonts, choosing a font that reflected the aesthetic and the theme that I wanted, resolving overlaps, and applying halos helps a lot, and also just providing space to read. So I used the Label Pro tool and applied rules and styling to reflect qualitative and quantitative visual hierarchy principles and communicate, the relative size of locations and the types of features. So Label Pro definitely helps save time, but I still did spend quite a bit of time just manually moving things around so it looked the way I wanted it to. And then finally, I integrate the map elements to communicate the information that supported the map, asking questions like, do I need this? Does it support my map? Is a good place to start. I decided to apply a graticule and integrate a scale bar because I wanted people to have a sense of scale. And then I've also integrated the supplemental text, this postcard theme. I use the same theme for my Australian memory maps, except I have this open common source Peruvian stamp and postage paid, which I removed the background from in Photoshop so it looks natural, and you can see a little bit closer here. So it's supposed to sort of emulate a postcard and then just give a little bit of a description about these places that we visited. And then we finally get to the end part where it starts to take a form. And I wanted to leave a lot of empty space. My Australian map is the same because I spent most of my time on the East Coast. So I wanted to leave space for thought, to retain the scale, and also for expansion. So these are just the settings for the graticule and scale bar. And this is my title block where I have a little bit of introductory text, an inspirational quote, and my legend and scale bar and source statements. So Investing time to learn more about the various softwares and fitness for purpose, I feel maximizes design opportunities. I really like the capability to be able to create my own layers and blend them together with Adobe Photoshop, and also retain the spatial projection, and then integrate all these layers back together. And I did note along the way there are limitations related to software performance, and it does help to research and experiment and not give up, be persistent, and find a way to make it work. So this is the final product, and my afterthoughts are, I really like the memory map series. I like the aesthetic, I like the color palette, and I really wanted to create this nostalgic experience of memory from long ago. Even though it wasn't that long ago, I still like that nostalgia that it emotes. But I do plan to expand this into an Esri story map platform and use the darker terrains and integrate all of that imagery. I have so many photos I would love to integrate. I feel like the bolder, darker terrain and some of the views that are easily integrated into the story map environment using the maps that Esri has. Machu Picchu looked beautiful on their maps. I didn't see that level of resolution in the satellite imagery. So I thought, well, this would be neat. I could integrate all of these things and really expand upon it. So I plan to do that in the future. So I thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of your conference.